Hello and welcome back to Cast of the Whills. Today is an incredibly exciting episode for me and hopefully for you. I am your host, Will, and with me is my amazing co-host, Amelia. And today we're talking about the music of Star Wars.
We are.
So we should probably give a bit of context to ourselves and toot our own horns a bit about our musical background. So I'll go first. So my background with music is that I did piano for about 5 years when I was younger. And then I did cello for about 8 years when I grew up. And I've been listening to Star Wars music for most of my life. I remember my mum very kindly putting up with me, putting in the Star Wars soundtrack CDs on the drive to school and the drive home every day. I would have their soundtracks to 4, 5, and 6 on CD on repeat. And we would also go to the MSO Star Wars nights. Maybe we'll get into that in a moment. But how about yourself?
I have a bit of an extensive musical history, if I do say so myself. I did piano for 9 years. I did violin for 7 years, I believe, 7 or 8 thereabouts. And I did French horn for 5 years. And somehow, despite doing it for far less time, I was most successful at French horn by a long shot. I was not particularly good at piano or violin. I was also in choirs for about 9 to 10 years of my high school life. So it has been about 5 years since I've done any of these. So I'm a bit out of practice, but the experience is in there somewhere.
And you've done some music subjects at uni.
I have.
Yeah.
A couple here and there.
Yeah. So, before we get into the music, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the MSO Star Wars nights.
Definitely.
So, would you like to give an explanation of what they are?
Yeah, so I believe it's called MSO at the Movies, the series that they do. So they project the movie above the orchestra in the Arts Centre in Melbourne, which is where we view them. And the orchestra plays all of the music in the movie. It's very easy to get caught up and just watch the movie, but if you take the time to actually look at the orchestra in front of you, it's very impressive.
Yeah, and they put together an amazing night. They have a lot of stuff going on before, during, and after to like have a bit of community. Mostly in the Star Wars ones, I find they do all those fun things. So if you're a Star Wars fan in Melbourne or Sydney or most cities around the world, my mum recently sent me one in Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's an international phenomenon. It is really worth because I think the music. Obviously, it's alive in the movie, but it really comes to life more when you see an orchestra playing it live and you hear just the orchestra. So I think those are an amazing event. If you ever get the chance to see it, I'm sure you would highly recommend it.
100%.
Anyway, that's enough talking about ourselves. Let's get to today's actual topic. So it is the music of Star Wars, the movies, the spin-offs, the TV shows, video games, everything. So we should probably start off with the origins of Star Wars music.
Let's get into it.
So if I can take you back to 1975 or 6 London, I believe, or maybe America, I don't know. London and America, the two well-known cities in the world. A man known as John Williams was busy playing piano in a jazz club, and he'd already done a few movies and documentaries. But then another man, George Lucas, who you may have heard of before, he came up to him and said, we need a soundtrack for this space serial called Star Wars. And at the time, in the 70s, the popular music score for films was a jazz score, which is obviously a bit foreign to us now. We couldn't imagine the past 15 years of movies all have a jazz score to them. So it's a bit foreign now, but at the time, that's what they're doing. But George Lucas gave John Williams the brief that this movie is going to be a space epic. It's going to be something like Flash Gordon, but we want a nice epic orchestral soundtrack, which I think John Williams was quite happy with. And then obviously, so he made the music, and you can hear the influence of Rachmaninoff, Brahms, Holst in the music. And an example of that is at the opening of Episode 4 in New Hope. You have the main crawl, but when you see the Star Destroyer go over the screen chasing the Tantive-4, John Williams is effectively using the music from Mars, which is part of the series The Planets by Holst, that, the impending sound. So you can hear this strong influence of classical music from the beginning of the Star Wars soundtrack. And throughout this episode, we'll talk a bit about the themes as they develop. We'll talk about maybe chord progressions if we're feeling brave enough. So maybe a better brief overview is episodes 4, 5, and 6, the original trilogy. You get that epic orchestral soundtrack. Every instrument's playing. We think of Han and Leia's theme, the Rebellion theme, the Imperial March. Obviously, the Force theme is a big one, and the main Star Wars theme. When we move towards the prequels, that's when you hear a lot of more army marching soundtracks. You think of the Republic's theme, you think of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the Battle Droid theme. These are moving, marching themes, usually involving a lot of percussion and snare drums. And then as we move forward in time into the sequels, that's when we get a lot of the punchy brass. So we get a lot of the French horns going dun 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 dun. Dun. So French horn lover. Also, I forgot to say at the beginning, a disclaimer. This episode will involve a lot of me humming things out of tune and a lot of us going, yeah, we like that theme. And just no one else is going, yeah, it's cool.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
So episode 4, we start off with some other inspirations. We start in episode 4, we see when Luke, Obi-Wan, R2-D2 and C-3PO are at the Sandcrawler, and then Luke realizes that the Imperials have gone to his aunt and uncle. When he discovers their bodies, we hear Dies Irae, which is a theme from, I believe, Germanic opera, which is the theme for death, and it goes na 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 na, and we hear that played, but it's a lot slower when Luke discovers their bodies, and obviously it's signifying death, and that death is approaching and following Luke. We also hear Dies Irae, interestingly, in Rogue One, especially in the last half hour of the movie. If you know about the movie, you probably know why the death theme plays non-stop in that last bit. You hear it mainly surrounding Director Krennic. When there are scenes of him chasing Jyn and Cassian, you hear that Dies Irae theme going in and out. The next little interesting tidbit I have for you is something that I feel like a lot of people forget is that the Imperial March doesn't appear in episode 4. It actually appears in the sequel, episode 5. And I think that was an interesting challenge for John Williams was the score for episode 4 is really iconic, and it was at the time. And then it's thinking, how do you elevate these themes? Because the Empire already had a theme in 4, but it wasn't as strong as the Imperial March. And then he created this theme for 5, which we all know now. And look, this might be a controversial hot take, and I know a few people that might disagree with me. I think the Imperial March is one of the best known pieces of music in film, let alone full stop. I think the Imperial March, anyone knows that tune, maybe today, more contemporary, but I think you can play the Imperial March to anyone. They will know it's from Star Wars, let alone Darth Vader. I don't know if you disagree with, can you think of any other piece of music that everyone would recognize as being from a certain IP or character?
I don't have any that come to mind specifically. Like I'm thinking of maybe The Lion King or some of the Hollywood classics from maybe the 30s, but it might be harder to pinpoint which movie those are associated with. And that also could just be, for example, in the case of The Lion King, we're in our early 20s. It's a contemporary movie for us, whereas if I think of my grandma, maybe not so much.
That's fair. So I think Imperial March definitely transcends that generational gap. And I think especially because I think in America they played a lot of sporting events. So I think it's just a theme that people are quite aware of.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a theme obviously a lot of people enjoy. I really appreciate Yoda's theme. It does the great balance for when you first meet Yoda and you don't actually know who he is, of that playful hermit side, but then also has that great wisdom. And we see this especially when he's lifting the X-Wing, is when the full orchestra comes in to demonstrate the power of the Force and Yoda's power. Episode 6 also has some really great themes. I mainly think of the Emperor's theme. That's a really powerful, heavy theme. And there's an insight about the Emperor's theme, which I don't think I've heard anyone talk about before, but I'm going to put a pin in that and address that later. But I don't think I've heard anyone talk about the Emperor's theme in a certain way. Also in episode 4, we get the Death Star attack trench run music, and we get the Ewoks themes. We get Jabba's Palace. One of my favorite pieces is Victory Celebration, and that's at the end of episode 6 when all the rebels are celebrating. Originally, it was a song called Yub Nub, and it was just like an Ewok chanting song. And, it's fun, it's playful, it's a kiddie song, which obviously episode 6 has those, juvenile themes in it. But then when they did the special editions, the remasters, they introduced this song called Victory Celebration. And that song's a bit more of a deep, emotionally holistic soundtrack. And at the time, the special editions came out around about after episode 3 came out, is when they introduced, I believe, Victory Celebration. When you watch all 6 movies in a row and you finish with that song, it's a really impactful piece of music. I mean, look, if you have Yub Nub, it's fun. But Victory Celebration gives you that full circle holistic moment, especially when you see Hayden Christensen's Force Ghost. Yeah. It really brings it all together. And I have a very special memory of the night before I saw Force Awakens watching Return of the Jedi. And like that piece of music stuck with me because it's such a beautiful just end of saga piece of music. So then when we move into episode 1, this is when we have to give the theme to the Republic and the old era and the Jedi. Most people obviously think of Duel of the Fates, which I'll get into that in a minute. But I like the Underworld City theme for the Gungans. I quite like Darth Maul has a bit of the spooky theme. And then we also get... Did I already mention the Confederacy theme?
You've talked about it.
I talked about it already, but that's a great one because another little fun tidbit is that the Imperial March, if you flip that and put it in a major chord and you play around with a few of the notes, you actually get the Battle Droid theme, which obviously is meant to be the through line of what these factions represent. So that's an interesting one. If you play those two side by side, you can hear how the music's been inverted a bit. And that's something great that John Williams does, is he plays with previous themes, Frankensteins them a bit and put them together, have different instruments play them in different keys, different chords. And that's meant to show something about characters. And once again, there's something incredible about episode's 8 score, which really reveals something deep about characters. We'll get to that later. Episode 2, we get the great Zam Wessel chase, where it has like the dun 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 dun, and something we haven't heard before in a Star Wars theme before then or since then is an electric guitar, which I think is such an interesting addition. I haven't seen Attack of the Clones for a hot minute, so I can't quite remember what scene. I assume it's like when Obi-Wan's falling in Coruscant. But I think the electric guitar is a very interesting choice of instrument. Obviously, it adds a different flavor to maybe the Coruscant scenes, which I find quite interesting. Something interesting we then later get in episode 2 is the love theme and arena, or love pledge and arena, sorry. And that's when we get a stronger development of the Battle Droid theme. So when we have the heavier drums, the brass, we get the full, what people would recognize as the Confederacy theme. And something interesting, which most people will remember from episode 2, is the Across the Stars theme. This is Anakin and Padme's love theme. And this is a very romantic theme. It takes a lot of inspiration from the 30s. So you think of Casablanca and those kind of movies, which I've not seen, but I'll quote them so I sound intelligent.
Well, I'm no better. I did the same earlier.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, I'm getting a lot of this from the YouTube account Listening In, who did an amazing deep dive on this. But what's interesting about Anakin and Padme's theme is if we remember episode 4, we have Leia's theme, which is the major sixth, is... Na, 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 na. And then we have Luke's theme, which is the major fifth, which is the main Star Wars theme, which is na, 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 na. And then we get Anakin and Padme's theme, which is the minor sixth, na, 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 na. So that Padme and Anakin's theme, it sits in between Luke and Leia's theme, which is another thing. You wouldn't know it unless you're being told, but once you hear it, it makes just the stories much more deep and the music much more meaningful. That much thought and effort has gone into the themes.
Do you think that is intentional?
I think, yes, for John Williams it would be. I don't think with him there's any mistakes or coincidences in the score. I forgot to address the episode 1 Duel of the Fates thing. I promised I'd get back to it, so I'll come back to it now before we get into episode 3. So Duel of the Fates is, I would say, the most iconic prequel tune.
I think I'm a big fan.
Yeah, maybe... I know I said Imperial March is like the most well-known music ever, but I think Duel of the Fates is probably up there with the most well-known Star Wars themes, just because it's very iconic. There's that movement.
Yeah. And particularly in more recent times.
Definitely more recent times as the prequel fandom has risen. I think the Duel of the Fates appreciation has also risen. Interesting thing about that theme, that's obviously the same. We've got Darth Maul versus Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and it's a dun 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 dun, and we get the na 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 na. So we get a scale, but in the scale, the fifth note is taken out. And that fifth note represents the imbalance in the scene. And we keep getting this duel in the orchestra between the woodwind, the brass, and the strings. They're all trying to fight one another. And then they come together at one point, but then once again, they fall back together again. And an interesting overlay across this whole theme is the vocals. And this is me really testing my knowledge here. The vocals, I believe, are taken from a Celtic poem.
Oh, okay.
And that poem represents, I think, death, life, fate, all of those themes. So that's why that theme feels so epic, because you've got this Celtic poem, which we wouldn't know the words for, but it just adds to that emphasis of the scene. And the play between the orchestra, all the bits of them, all of them coming together, them falling apart, the scales going up and down, it's trying to add this imbalance to the scene. It's speeding up, then it's slowing down. It has to crescendo, then it starts from one instrument again and it builds back up. And I think that's what's so great about Duel of Fates and why it's iconic. It's not the music, it's the orchestra playing the music, which is really establishing the themes of that scene. And another really important thing is we don't hear a lot of vocals in Star Wars full stop. The only time we hear it is for Palpatine's theme and in Duel of the Fates and Battle of the Heroes. We hear it some other times, but the times where it's the prominent star of the music are those three scenes. And I think that John Williams is trying to tell us something when he uses vocals. Otherwise, he'd be using vocals for Leia's theme, for Han and Leia's theme, for Luke's theme. There's clearly a reason why the vocals are being saved for these special moments. I think the vocals represent the dark side, represent a disturbance and imbalance. So now I get to the part of the Palpatine theme analysis, which I've never heard anyone talk about before. And if I'm wrong, you're welcome to prove me wrong.
Well, I might pause you there then.
Ooh,
I'll keep
okay.
the audience waiting a bit longer
Oh,
to talk more about the Duel of the Fates.
Of course.
Spruiking the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra again.
Yes.
We went to a John Williams concert
Yes,
that was
yes.
performed by them maybe a few years ago now.
mm-hmm.
And I remember we saw Duel of the Fates performed and the orchestra started and then the choir came out when the vocals started. And that really, I find it hard to describe, but it felt epic. Like you
Yes,
said
it
earlier,
does.
like as soon as the vocals started, even though they're not necessarily the feature of the
Yeah,
piece, I feel like the piece all works. It's quite balanced.
Yes.
But once you get the vocals, it feels like something changes in the
Yeah.
mood.
And that's great. Yeah.
And as an audience member, it was pretty special to watch.
Yeah, and I think that's another great thing the MSO do. They do these composer nights. They do one for Hans Zimmer, but the John Williams one, that's where I'm getting all these fun facts from. They're not from my head. They're completely stolen. No. Some of these ideas are my own. But they did a night where they play the music, they pause it, they dissect it.
Yeah.
They go into the themes, they go into the ideas of how these themes evolved over time. And that was a really special way to hear the music. It wasn't just a melody of John Williams music, which is great. They would play a few bars, they'd pause it, they would explain where it came from. So if I can now get back to my little tidbit.
to it.
So as I said, I haven't heard anyone talk about this, but if someone has talked about it, let me know because I'd love to see what they would have to say about it. So Palpatine's theme is this low bass male choir. Obviously, bass is male. It's the it's very ominous, very sinister. It's evil. So where else do we hear this? We hear the vocals in episode 1, obviously during Duel of Fates. We also hear it when Palpatine appears in episode 1. We hear it in episode 2 when Palpatine appears at the end with Count Dooku. We hear those low vocals. We also hear it in Rise of Skywalker when Palpatine's around. Another time we hear it, not Palpatine's theme, but some vocals. Once again, the vocals are used purposefully. In episode 3, when Mace Windu goes to Palpatine's office and you have Padme's in her apartment and Anakin's in the Jedi Council chambers. And there's the moment you might remember where they're both just looking out to the horizon and then Padme starts crying and then Anakin starts crying just because of everything that's happened in the movie. And what's interesting, Wick, is really high-pitched female singer. And it's this really off-putting, disturbing sound. Like it doesn't even sound like a human singing it and it really does hit you. So clearly vocals in Star Wars, for me, I believe, represent the dark side, represent evil, represent disturbance. So now that John Williams has established this, I would say, musical semantic field of vocals equals dark side, and even though this moment happens before we establish this field, I think it still illustrates character, especially if you watch them in chronological order. In episode 6, when we're on the Death Star with Luke, Vader, and Palpatine, and Luke and Vader are fighting, and Luke is hiding underneath the staircase in the darkness, and then Vader's trying to taunt out Luke, and then Vader discovers that Luke has a sister, and then Vader says, well, if you won't turn, then perhaps she will. Luke grabs his lightsaber, ignites it, starts slashing away at Vader, hitting him as hard as he can, trying to kill him. What part of the orchestra comes to life in that moment?
I think you'll have to tell me.
The choir does, and once again, it's these low or bass male voices come in again, and that's John Williams telling us Luke has gone to the dark side. We can probably infer that from him swinging his lightsaber at Vader and going for the kill, cutting off his hand. But I think, once again, your brain recognizes that this vocal tune represents the dark side, and in that moment, Luke is the one attacking, not Vader. And John Williams is telling us Luke has given himself to the dark side for those few moments where he is trying to kill Darth Vader. And I think that's something really interesting. And that is where music elevates a story. And what really brings a story to life is that we can tell what the characters are going through just from the music. And I think that's such a special thing that we were given in that movie. So,
well, why do you think that is? That
What
the
do you mean?
vocals have been chosen to represent the dark side as
I
opposed
think it's
to
important.
any of the other instruments.
That's a good
in an
one. I
orchestra?
think vocals are human. And if the instrument sounds off, it sounds more disturbing than an out of tune trumpet. So if you hear a human voice that's really off-putting, I feel like that's more off-putting than hearing a brass instrument or a violin that's off-putting. Because the human voice, something connects to you that says, that's another person. Maybe I'm in danger. Something's off. I need to be aware. So I think maybe that instrument of a vocal is chosen because that hits us on a human and on a deeper level, because we can subconsciously connect to vocals more than we can to an orchestral instrument. So I think, and that's a great question. I think that's why that was chosen, because you feel it more and your brain maybe processes it more. So now we move on to episode 3, and we get some great themes in episode 3. We get the Order 66 theme. I think that really elevates the entire scene. Those violins carry that piece of music. But then the most well-known piece of music from that is Battle of the Heroes. And that is a scene. Try watching it without the music on. It is a different scene. That scene, obviously, it's exciting. It's powerful. You've got Anakin versus Obi-Wan, and you got Palpatine versus Yoda. High stakes. They're fighting for the fate of the galaxy. They're the most powerful characters, doing flips, they're doing all this stuff. But if you take away the music, it kind of makes the scenes quite dry. But when you add the music in, it elevates. We're listening to it this morning. The music alone, it tells you this is important. This is an epic battle that'll define fates for these characters. And I think it's definitely, once again, the vocals appear, which really establishes how important this scene is. But something very important that we hear, and we only hear it for a few bars, and you don't hear it on the soundtrack, you hear it when you're watching the movie. When Yoda and Palpatine are fighting, for a little bit of it, you hear Duel of the Fates. You hear a reprise of Duel of the Fates.
Okay.
Which obviously that represents something potentially, obviously it's representing the fate of the galaxies being fought over in these two battlefields. Yoda and Palpatine are fighting for the political future of the galaxy, and Obi-Wan and Anakin are fighting for the Force future of the galaxy. And I think reusing Duel of the Fates, once again, it makes you connect to that earlier movie, and it makes you think of those themes of fate. So now we jump forward in time, and we go to The Force Awakens, which the challenge was, when you're trying to do the originals, a bit of a homage to the originals of the Empire Rebellion themes, John Williams has made the most recognizable bad guy theme ever, which is the Imperial March. How do you one-up the Imperial March? That is not an easy task.
Even for John Williams.
Even
I'm
for
sure.
John Williams. But I think the First Order theme, the dun-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, I think that does it gives you this great image of it imitating the Imperial March. It isn't a copy of the Imperial March, and it isn't an alternation. You can tell it's trying to be the Imperial March, but no, it isn't. It knows it isn't. And that is obviously what the First Order is to the Empire. It's the shadow of the Empire. So I think that's another great way he uses music to tell story. Another great theme is the Resistance theme. That's a very punchy brass theme, very military, very guerrilla dogfighting. It's very like dun, 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 and it's very like to the point. It's trying to hit you. The best theme I think John Williams created for the sequels overall was Rey's theme. It's a very simple theme, and it starts off with the flute going dun 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 dun, and then over the course of it, it starts to build up. You get, I think, another flute, and then you get the full orchestra, especially the strings, really getting into it. And I think that was a really great theme. And something interesting about Rey's theme, I can't remember which YouTube channel I heard this from, and this could be a conspiracy theory, but if you listen to Rey's theme, apparently John Williams left space for it to develop into Yoda's theme, into Obi-Wan's theme, into Palpatine's theme, into Luke's theme. Okay. Because at the time, they didn't know who Rey was related to. So I think John Williams went, let's make sure the theme can connect to these 10 characters.
Whoever it could be.
And whoever it ends up being, it links them perfectly. Because then you see in Rise of Skywalker, Rey's theme connects perfectly to Palpatine's theme. Which that's just the genius of John Williams, is that he planned ahead and he's like, look, we don't know where this saga's going, but he planned that in the music. I think that's so impactful. We also hear in episode 7 the theme where Kylo Ren kills his father Han Solo, and that's another really impactful scene. Overall, and my favorite piece probably from episode 7 is Jedi Steps and finale. That's when Rey discovers Luke and she's walking up Michael Skellig Acto. And it's this na 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 na, and it's this great momentum and build up of mystery, and then she finally gets to the top of the mountain and she sees Luke and he removes his hood, and we hear the Force theme. So we then move into episode 8. 8 has some of the better music and styles, I'd say. This is when John Williams really is taking risks in this movie. We hear a really great theme for Rose, especially. A really fun theme for Canto Bight. Canto Bight leans into the more jazzy themes, which I think is a lot of fun. But a very interesting bit of episode 8 is at the end when Luke appears on Crate, on the ice salt planet, and all hope is lost. Luke appears. We hear Luke and Leia's theme, which I think might be my favorite Star Wars theme attacks. I like all of them, but Luke and Leia's the na 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 na. I really like that one. We hear it in Return of the Jedi when Luke and Leia are talking about them being related and Vader being his father and all that. And the only time we hear it again is in episode 8. And we get that nice scene between Luke and Leia. And then when Luke gives the dice to Leia, we hear Han and Leia's theme. But then what's interesting is when Luke starts walking out by himself towards the AT-ATs in Kylo Ren, we hear na 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 na. This 3-note phrase played over and over again. And this 3-note phrase is from a German opera called Agamemnon, which is based on a Greek story where Agamemnon's ghost is haunting the main character. And we hear this theme, and then later in the movie, what is revealed? Luke Skywalker wasn't there. He's just a Force projection. So John Williams, before it's revealed, is telling the audience Luke is a ghost appearing to Kylo Ren. He isn't actually there. I think that's an incredible example. I don't know how many Germanic opera fans were seeing Last Jedi at the time.
Do you think many people picked
up on that? Yeah, probably not. I don't think people picked up on it. We're going, okay, great, John Williams spoiled the moment. But I think that's something, once you hear that, it's just this genius.
It's retrospectively.
It's this retrospective.
Fantastic.
And then when you watch the movie, you're like, this guy's a genius. He knows how to use music, knows how to homage music without plagiarizing it and to develop it further. I think that's what he does so well in these themes. And then you hear something like that, and of course it is. Of course it is. Because I always loved that little 3-note thing. I only found it recently from listening in that theme was from that opera. And I think that is an incredible idea that John Williams was able to put into that moment. And then we move into episode 9. Admittedly, I've not listened to episode 9 track as much as the other ones. We get a lot of reprises from the rest of the saga, because obviously it's the conclusion. We hear Darth Vader's theme, the Death Star theme, Palpatine's theme, the Force theme, and all these things are used to obviously connect to the rest of the saga. A really interesting piece of music is the finale music, and that's obviously, I don't think it would matter what movie they did. I think the finale music just hits hard no matter what, because it's this triumphant end of a epic music. So it doesn't matter what movie that'd be in, that music would be great. And then we hear a really great theme at the end when we see Rey going to Tatooine and going to where Luke grew up, and it's a dun-na-na-na-na-na. And once again, it's this great momentum cyclical theme that we hear again. And I think John Williams is great. He's great at building momentum in music, not just the notes and the tempo and the crescendo, decrescendo, but how he uses instruments, taking instruments in and out, cutting them out all together. And we hear this great theme build and build and build, and then it ends on the Force theme. And then that's what we end the saga on. And obviously the Force theme is something we hear through line. Obviously it's in 4 when Luke is looking off to the binary sunset. And it is Luke's theme a bit as well. And we hear it a bit more in the originals, and we hear it every now and then. It's interesting. In the prequels, it's almost like the Force theme. They don't play it slowly. It's always like, na 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 na. It's na 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 na. Like it's always a fast-paced Force theme. Whenever you get the Force theme like really slowed down, or it's like the epic when Obi-Wan and Luke are fighting. It's like dun 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 dun. So I think that's always interesting that we never get the Force theme like really breathing and time to just be there. It's always like in episode 1 we hear it again when Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan are on Naboo trying to take the throne room back. We hear the Force theme again. And the Force theme is played a lot in the sequels. I might say almost too much. I think it's maybe overdone. I think my issue with it is just it doesn't feel special if it's used every few seconds, like when Finn grabs a blaster. No, 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 no. And it's like, it's a cool moment when Finn's arming up, but like, do we need to hear the Force theme? I don't think that's a specific example, but I feel like 7 uses it a bit. No, 8 uses it a bit more. I think it's used well when Rey and Kylo fight together. We hear it when Snoke dies. That's a good moment of like choice, destiny, fate. And then 9, I think maybe overuses it a bit. So I think the Force theme is used quite well over the course of the saga. I think just in the last 3 is maybe when it's a bit maybe overdone. So otherwise, now we can maybe move to talking about the spin-off movies. Firstly, Rogue One's the more meaty one. So we'll talk about Solo. Solo has some great themes. I think John Powell's the composer. Han and Kira's theme. Another hot take of mine, I think that's the best love theme in Star Wars. Better than Padme and Anakin, better than Han and Leia. I think Han and Kira's theme, and I think it's called Lando's Closet on the soundtrack. I think that's the most emotive, romantic, orchestral theme we get in Star Wars. Otherwise, Solo, it's quite a good soundtrack, and it uses a few of the themes from the original movies. Like we get the Star Wars theme when we see the Falcon for the first time. So yeah, Solo is a good, fun soundtrack. I think a really special soundtrack is Rogue One. And when I talk about Rogue One, keep in mind, most composers have over a year to make a soundtrack. Fact check me on this. Michael Giacchino only had a month for this soundtrack.
Wow.
He did not have a lot of time. So when I'm talking about all these things the soundtrack does, he had a 12th of the time that you're meant to have. So Michael Giacchino, he's another incredible composer. He's well known for doing a lot of the Disney and Marvel movies. So he's done Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, The Fantastic Four, which has a great theme, and The Incredibles, and a few other soundtracks of more recent times. I think he's a really great, punchy composer. He does really good themes. He does very iconic, distinguished themes. So Rogue One, Jyn Erso and the Hope Suite, that's an amazing piece of music. It's a very romantic, a lot of emphasis on character piece of music, and it's a very hopeful piece of music, which I think is the theme of the movie. And then once again, we hear a lot of that DS era following director Krennic. The Imperial themes are very good, considering I don't think we hear too much of the Imperial March. Michael Giacchino does a great job of establishing the Empire as a character through the music. And obviously Darth Vader's hallway scene, that music is insane. That music is like the dun, dun. I think it's just almost like the meh, meh. And it's letting you know these guys are not escaping. They're here to die. And the music the music does not give you any hope, which I kind of love. And the movie then ends, I believe, on the Force theme. And obviously that ties in well to episode 4. So that's the spin-offs. And then
Could take us into Andor.
Which could take...
Talking
All right,
about
we'll
the TV
move into
shows.
Andor. So Andor has a really good theme. I think it has a very strong main theme. But my favorite theme from Andor is the past and present suite.
Agreed.
And that's the one. It's very Inception coded, I remember
think
you
so.
saying. Yeah. And it's this piece of momentum. I think at the beginning of the song...
Gravity as well.
A lot of gravity, yeah.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the piece, I think you actually hear a clock ticking. And then you get the violins and a bit more of the orchestra. And then these scenes are giving you like a compilation of where everyone is at a certain point in time, what everyone's up to and across various parts of the galaxy. And it's a great summarizing piece of music. And then we get a development of the same at the end of Andor Season 2. It's the past, present, future suite. And once again, this piece of music perfectly sets up the pieces for Rogue One, because you see where all the characters are like minutes before Rogue One starts. And the music does such a great job of that momentum of pushing, and then it ends. And then you're like, all right, I got to watch Rogue One now. And I think that's why music plays such an important role, because music will make you energized, it'll make you sad, it'll make you scared, fearful. All these emotions come from a score. And I think Andor's another great example of how score can effectively be used in TV. Another interesting theme is the Obi-Wan theme from the Obi-Wan TV show, which John Williams did the theme for that show. He didn't do any of the other music, just that one. And that one goes, dun, 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 and that one's played on a French horn by itself. And I think that theme does such a great job of having a lone heroic instrument, which obviously the theme of the show is Obi-Wan on his own. And I think that's what the theme communicates so well, is that Obi-Wan's on his own, but beneath all of the trauma, all the tragedy, there's still that hero lying beneath it. Once again, this is how music is telling us these stories. And are there any other TV shows in Star Wars that have interesting or really good soundtracks?
Well, we'd be remiss not to talk about Ludwig Göransson,
Of course, the genius known as Ludwig Göransson, who has revolutionized music, I would say, very interestingly. He did The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. But before he did those, he did Black Panther.
He did.
And Black Panther has an amazing soundtrack of these instruments you typically don't hear in big Hollywood movies. And he did such an effective job of establishing the musical language of Wakanda, of Black Panther. And we see that theme, then it gets used in Infinity War. And we know that, I think Captain America says, you know, we're going home or something. And then we hear the Black Panther drums. And everyone knows they're going to Wakanda. And that's
such an iconic instrument that
it's
you
only
haven't
used
really
there.
heard before.
Exactly. And that's why establishing a musical language is so important, especially in these bigger franchises. It's so important to have a through line of the music so the audience knows before we're even told of what to expect. And that really rewards audience engagement, I find, as well. So then Ludwig then did a little show called The Mandalorian Season 1. And this is an amazing theme. And the theme in this show, it has that very iconic, is it a bass recorder?
I think that's what we...
Yeah, I think we looked at it as a bass recorder, and it's that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, which establishes the mystery of the Mandalorian. When you see the Mandalorian and you see the silhouette, you see the helmet, and that's all you hear, intrigue. And then as the theme develops, we then transition a bit back into the John Williams. We get the brass going, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. And then we get this feeling of, okay, this is Star Wars. We're back into Star Wars. And then towards the end is when you get the full orchestra, the violins, the woodwind, the brass, the percussion. We're getting everyone's in it, and you feel like you're on this epic space adventure. And that's what I think the theme of The Mandalorian does so well. It was 2019 Disney Plus, the first big TV show on Disney Plus. It's a new era of Star Wars. That's what I think Ludwig did so well. The beginning part with the bass recorder, this is a new theme for Star Wars. But as we progress, we realize this is the old Star Wars we know. This is the John Williams, the full orchestra. And that's what the show's getting at. The show was a new side of the galaxy, but it was very much an homage to the original trilogy. And I think that piece of music perfectly represents what the show is trying to achieve. And then another way Ludwig evolves the music is Moff Gideon's theme. And I'm not even going to try to hum it because that's like a synth, it's a snare. You've got this imposing theme that once again, you just hear the dun, 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 and you know Moff Gideon's about to come. You know the good guys are not going to win. And I think that's another really powerful way that music is shown in The Mandalorian. And then we get Boba Fett's theme in The Mandalorian Season 2, which then evolves and changes into the Book of Boba Fett theme, which I think is another great piece of music because that one is more like a pirate chanty, Viking, humming song. And it's such a distinct piece of music in the Star Wars pantheon, but it establishes that Boba Fett character so well because he isn't your hero who gets the brass playing for him. He isn't the romantic character who has the strings. He is more of this outlaw pirate character, and I think that's what was so great about that theme. Another great piece of music we get in the Book of Boba Fett is Teacher's Pet, and it's the piece of music that plays when Luke is training Yoda, and it has this... When you're watching that scene of Luke and Baby Yoda, or Grogu, sorry, you feel whimsy, you feel happy. This is peak Return of the Jedi Luke. He is training everyone's favorite character, Grogu. So this is an amazing moment. And the music just encapsulates that feeling of whimsy, wonder. There is no real minor chord or minor progressions in that piece of music. And it's just this happy training montage music. And I love that piece of music. I don't get ahead of myself and say it's my favorite TV show Star Wars music because it is such like a happy theme and it represents what it is. And there are probably like, the Mandalorian theme is probably a technically better piece of music. And so I really like that Teacher's Pet theme from the Book of Boba Fett.
Good name too.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a fun name as well. I always wonder how they name things. Is it like a chicken or egg scenario? Like, are they kind of given a brief and then they name it, or do they make the piece of music and then afterwards they name it? Quickly, I'd mention Burying the Dead from the Clone Wars Season 7 finale. That's a very interesting piece of music because I think it might be the only time we really get a electric keyboard and a synth being the main instruments. We don't really hear the brass or the strings or the woodwind. We're just given this hollow piece of music that you feel when it's the end of your childhood in the Clone Wars, but it's Ahsoka and Rex burying all the clones. And it's this one piece of music that it just sits with you because it's a very simple piece of music. It doesn't move quickly. It only progresses a little bit, but it's that synth. The synth like crescendos and the sound becomes a lot wider. And it's a really powerful piece of music in that episode, let alone Star Wars. I think that's a piece of music that people know probably from like social media now. So that's a really powerful piece of music from Clone Wars. Clone Wars uses a lot of the brass inspiration from John Williams. I haven't seen Rebels, so I can't talk about Rebels. Sorry. And other shows, The Acolyte, I couldn't remember too much of that music.
No, nothing coming to mind.
Nah, Skeleton Crew, I couldn't hum a tune, but I remember it being very fun. I remember because the show is like a kid show.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun as an audience member.
Yeah.
And I trust that the music had something to do with that.
Definitely. I think it was trying to harken back to that Indiana Jones fun style of music and all that. And then the other shows we have, I think those are all the shows from memory.
Yeah, I'm not recalling any others.
No. So maybe we might now move on to the video games. Video game music is very, very unique in that in movies, when you have the piece of music and the score, you can edit the scene so that the beats, the Force theme happens when Snoke dies, the Force theme plays. Yes, video games have cutscenes, but when you're in combat in video games, that isn't scripted. So the challenge with the score for a video game is you need music that can fit any point of interaction with the player. So a great example of this is Knights of the Old Republic. That's the role-playing game from the early 2000s, computer role-playing game. And that has some really powerful things. I really love Darth Revan's theme and the Taris theme. But a more modern example for people is the Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order games. They have really great pieces of music. I'm thinking of Confronting the Past, A New Weapon, Dusk. All of these pieces of music are very emotive. And I really am interested in the challenge of making music for video games and that the players won't be doing what you want them to do. Because, especially with Star Wars games, because most Star Wars video games, which I do not complain about, they just use the movie music in the game. So a lot of the time when people review a video game and they talk about the music, if it's a Star Wars game, it's usually getting 10 out of 10 because it's just John Williams. Like, it's not new, but...
Can't get much better.
But when you're, playing Star Wars Battlefront 2 and you're a rebel, trying to escape the Death Star, and you have the Death Star music playing and the Rebellion theme playing and the Imperial March playing, I don't think you can complain too much about that. Or when you're playing Lego Star Wars, I think Lego Star Wars did numbers for Star Wars music because people recognize a lot of Star Wars music from the Lego Star Wars game.
Okay.
I think once again, it's that John Williams iconic score. And so I think any Star Wars game that uses John Williams music I wouldn't call it a cheat code, but it's an easy 10 out of 10 in my book for music in a game. But I really do appreciate the Jedi games. They, once again, they respect the past of John Williams, but they embrace a new vibe, semantic language of music, which I find really interesting. I think that is mainly it for Star Wars from my memory. Maybe because we're talking about music and you're stuck here and you're going to have to listen, maybe we can talk about John Williams's portfolio a bit more. So some other really interesting themes from his is obviously the Indiana Jones theme, probably his next most iconic theme after the Star Wars Imperial March and all that.
I think it is a personal favourite of mine too.
Yeah, and look, I'm not too surprised about it. That was another one that the MSO did, and hearing that live is great. And we heard that at the John Williams night. And a little fun fact they told us at the John Williams night was originally John Williams had two themes for Indiana Jones. It was dun 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 dun, And the other theme was the na 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 na. John Williams showed Spielberg these. Spielberg just kind of said, why not both? So that's why we now have the dun 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 dun, dun, and then later in it you get the dun 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 dun, dun, which is really interesting to hear that just you can have a theme by just smashing two themes together. Some other really iconic pieces of music is the strange Close Encounters with the third kind, and that's the dun 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 dun. Dun. So it's a 5-note phrase. And on that night, they were saying the big challenge is there are 8 notes, right? In music, 8 and
8 white notes, 13 total, I believe.
13 total notes. How do you have aliens communicate to humans that they are friendly through 5 notes out of, you have 13 to choose from and you have to use 5. I can't do the maths on how many millions of combinations of notes there are. And we heard the orchestra play a few different variations, the na 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 na, and you can tell it doesn't sound right. So I think it was incredible that John Williams was able to land on those 5 notes that make you trust these aliens, because I remember hearing in a documentary maybe that if aliens were to come to Earth, the best way for them to connect with us would be through music. And that's what they showed through that movie. Some other amazing John Williams themes are E.T., that's a really iconic one. I think a lot of people know that tune and have not. I haven't seen the movie, and I love that theme.
It's been too long to recall, but
have you
iconic.
seen it before?
I have seen it, but
okay, interesting.
I would have been quite small.
Yeah, fair. But I think that's another amazing theme. Obviously, Schindler's List is an incredible theme. You don't even have to have seen the movie. If you just know the subject matter of the movie and you hear that theme, it will make you cry. It's a very impactful theme. I think it's just well known now in the classical music community, not just movie music. It's such a powerful, evocative piece of music. Another piece of music which has stood the test of time clearly, because we found out a few months ago, is the Superman theme. That obviously got reused in the 2025 movie, but that was a theme, French horn once again, of heroism, bravery, the American way, and all those fun things that go with it. Another fun little John Williams theme is he did, and once again, I could just be making up the dates and locations, he did the 1992 LA Olympics theme.
Oh, yeah.
So he did that theme, which is just another little feather in his cap. And he just did a lot of TV show, or not TV show, but like news channel music. So he has this wide portfolio of music, and it really spans all these different themes. And obviously the Jurassic Park theme, that's another iconic piece of music. That's another piece of music that makes you feel wonder, of whimsy. And so when you line up the Superman theme, Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, Imperial March, these are highly contrasting pieces of music. And you can't even believe that it's coming from the same person.
I don't think there's a more impressive portfolio.
No, and it's the breadth of it, it's the diversity of it, but it's also once again him recognizing and paying and commending the classics, Holst, Rachmaninoff, Brahms, all of them. And that's what's so powerful about his music, is maybe he is the culmination of all of the classical music being brought into the modern age. Obviously, another classical theme is Harry Potter, Hedwig's theme. A fun trivia fact I learned about that was most of the time when they are recording movie music, the orchestra gets it on the day, and they usually actually sight reading the music, which I don't know.
That's my worst nightmare,
yeah,
I think.
because we used to play in orchestras. You'd get, 20 weeks to learn a piece of music, and you could barely play it. Actually, a little tangent. I remember in my school orchestras, especially the symphony one with all the instruments, I kept on pushing to do Star Wars music, but we never did it, which is really annoying. But the brass band got to do it.
I did get to play the main theme.
Yeah, it's so annoying. So I always wanted to do a Star Wars theme. I mean, obviously the opening crawl would be the fun one, but you could do any themes really that involve the whole orchestra. But getting back to Hedwig's theme, so usually orchestras, they get the music on the day off and they have to sight read, which is insane when you think about how difficult these pieces are. When you listen to the recordings, there's no errors. I get these musicians at the top of the game, like especially the London Symphony Orchestra. These would be some of the best musicians in the world. I find it surprising there are no mistakes in the music. But I guess they do touch it up in between takes and they can re-record it. But the interesting thing with Hedwig's theme is that the violins were sent that piece of music early because that one is just this really fast scale going up and down with a few changes like hidden in the middle of it. So I could imagine the horror when you're used to going, oh, we play hard music, but we sight read. And John Williams goes, you're going to need a bit of practice before you play this one. I could not imagine the fear going into that first violinist trying to think, okay, what else is going to be in this score if we're being warned about this. And Harry Potter, Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets are very iconic. Prisoner of Azkaban is such an interesting one because that movie obviously is very distinct from the other two movies. And John Williams then develops his own themes in that one that are different to the first two because it's a more mature movie. And I think it's called A Window into the Past. That's a theme that feels a lot more mature because the first two movies have that very childish, kiddish themes to them, which is obviously the style of the first two. But the third one is when we start maturing a bit. And we get those mature themes in the third one. Otherwise, I think...
I might say on the topic of orchestra sight reading with movie music, when I was getting to the end of my French horn career, we had to do what was called sight transposition because
What is sight transposition?
The horn is not at concert pitch. So I hope I'm not going into too much musical jargon here, but if you think of the piano, that's what we call concert pitch. So like a violin, when the score is written up for a violin, it's at concert pitch. So if there's a C in the violin score, that matches up to a C note on the piano.
Really?
For horn and several other instruments, that's not the case. So for example, I played in an F horn and a B flat horn. So when you get higher up into your studies of the instrument, you would have to do what's called sight transposition. So they might say, here's a piece in F, can you play it for me in C? And it was incredibly challenging. And I believe that's what a lot of professional musicians are doing day to day.
Wow.
And I really just take my hat off to them because it was so difficult, so unbelievably difficult.
Definitely.
So
hats off to the orchestra players. I don't know how they do their job. I mean, it must be a little bit of fun if you get to play Star Wars. You know?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it's highly rewarding.
Yeah.
But definitely to be at the top of your game as a musician is so impressive at least to me, but I'm sure to most people who enjoy the orchestra or movie scores, etc.
And going back to John Williams a bit, another piece of music, I think we're just going to keep saying, another piece of music, and I'm sure after we record, I'll go, I should have mentioned that. But a really iconic piece of music that a lot of people think it was him is Home Alone and the I'll Be Home for Christmas.
Yes.
A lot of people know that piece
Somewhere in My Memory.
Somewhere in My Memory, not I'll Be Home for Christmas. Somewhere in My Memory. That's that very emotive. I wouldn't call it a sad Christmas song, but it hits you.
It's emotional. Yeah.
It's very emotional, especially when you watch Home Alone. And that one is, once again, it's the genius of John Williams. He's not doing a space opera. He's not doing an adventure theme. He's not doing a Man from the Stars. He's not doing a historical movie. He's not doing a shark in the water. He's doing this Christmas music, but it isn't cheesy Christmas. It's just wholesome Christmas music. And I think Home Alone is another really fun piece. I've seen the MSO play that once or twice now, and they have the full choir come out for that one. And that really hits you hard when you have a full choir singing for that, which you were meant to be in that choir, weren't you? Yeah.
Yes.
But why didn't that end up happening?
I was in my school musical and I was double booked, unfortunately.
Damn.
So the choir I was in outside of school was employed to be the children's choir performing Somewhere in My Memory in the MSO performance of Home Alone. And I was asked to be a part of it and would have loved to, but unfortunately the school musical had to come first because I had that date in my calendar. So
you're saying your school musical came before John Williams? Is that...
Not quite.
Right, okay. So if John Williams was there in person, you would have still skipped it.
Possibly not.
Right.
But
I'm really kidding. Another one I just quickly mentioned, the Jaws theme.
How do you make a theme out of two notes?
How do you make it? And on the... sorry. But on the double bass... You make a theme on the double bass that iconic? Just the durnin. Anyone goes durnin, and instantly everyone thinks, all right, shark in the water. I think that is the power of the John Williams brainworm, is the themes, they make you happy, scared, all these things. But it makes you afraid of the water, two notes on the piano, on the double bass, and you're afraid of the ocean. How powerful must your music be, and how much of a genius must you be to be able to do that? And I'm sure, I know it sounds like, just to do that. I'm sure it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, but to even have that idea after dozens of hours of writing, I think is so impressive. Another fun fact about John Williams, which I think is still true, is he still hand writes all of the music. So modern days now, you'd probably use digital software to write the instruments and you can maybe play it to see what it sounds like. He hand writes every instrument, every bar. I cannot imagine how long that would take. I don't know how he holds on to the music in his brain. Like when he's on bar 54. Oh yeah, these instruments are playing this in bar 54, and how do you make it all line up? I'm sure there's a bit of correcting over time, but handwriting it, I think that must mean he puts more time and effort into the music and maybe thinks a bit more deeply about it, which I think that's an amazing art in itself, is the transposing of music. Otherwise...
Do you have a favourite Star Wars piece? To
I
bring
thought
it
I was
back
going
to
to get
Star
out of
Wars.
this episode without answering it. Now I'm going to have to just name every piece.
Top 3 then.
Top 3? Do I have to put them in order?
No.
Oh, okay.
Unless
That's
you'd
hard.
like to.
No, I don't want to. I really don't want to. Look, the Star Wars theme is really iconic. I don't think... I love Yoda's theme. I really like Luke and Leia's theme. For a while, an issue I had was the Imperial March is overplayed. And then I was like, oh, wait, it's actually a good piece of music, though. So that shouldn't matter. Oh, okay. Duel of Fates is iconic. Battle of the Heroes is iconic. Anakin's Dark Deeds is iconic.
Should I go first then?
All right, maybe you should go first.
All right. I don't know if I have a top 3 necessarily, but The Mandalorian is definitely up there for me. It could just be number 1
really?
by itself.
Okay, why is that?
And I say that because I like how it differs from the rest of the orchestral music we've come to know and expect from the movies. Not just from Star Wars or from John Williams, but from movies more broadly.
Yeah, fair enough.
So you were talking about how movies in the 70s tended to have a jazz score, and through largely the influence of John Williams, we've come to have orchestral scores.
Yeah.
I feel that the music of The Mandalorian steps away from the orchestra, and well, of course, it's still performed by an extremely talented orchestra, and as you mentioned earlier, the end of that main piece in The Mandalorian is a big almost fanfare from the orchestra.
Yeah.
The start of it being that bass recorder, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the bass recorder is in most orchestras.
Doesn't get much love.
No, it doesn't. And it feels more of a modern take on music for visual media, I suppose. And I really like that. Again, if I think back to the Black Panther, like you were talking about as well, having these unique instruments where you can really just tell, like, that's the Mandalorian or that's Wakanda.
Yeah.
I like how that differs from a big orchestral fanfare that we're used to in Star Wars, for example. Doesn't mean I don't love those.
Yeah.
But the reason that the Mandalorian sticks out to me so much is because it is special and it's unique. And as established last episode, being a modern fan myself, maybe not the biggest fan of episodes 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, I think that's my favourite.
No, that's awesome. I love that you love the Mandalorian theme. Yeah.
So, what about you?
All right. Oh, I was hoping I could get away with it still. I think Yoda's theme is up there for me. That's a great mystical theme. It's very gentle with the violins when it starts. And then we get the cellos. I'm a cello player, so any piece that has cellos I think I like. But the na 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 na, that's played with cellos. And I always get emotional when I hear cellos because cellos always have the really rich notes.
Yeah.
Massive side tangent, but when Dumbledore dies in Half-Blood Prince, that's a cello that plays that, and that hurts, that piece of music. All right, so Yoda's theme is on my Mount Rushmore of Star Wars music. I didn't think this far ahead. Luke and Leia's theme, I really like. We only hear it twice in the whole saga, but it is such... Yeah, like I said earlier, is when Luke and Leia are talking in the Ewok village about Darth Vader and them being related. And then we hear in episode 8 when Luke appears on Crate and he's talking to Leia. We hear a reprise of that theme. It's such... Oh, I just realized it is a cello theme. Yep, it's cellos. Okay, great. Sorry.
Well, you're allowed
the cellos
to have
come back again.
a common theme to your favourites.
Yeah, so Luke and Leia's theme is second on that list in no order. Oh, that's so hard because the Force theme is just perfect. The Imperial March is iconic. I love Moff Gideon's theme. Oh, man. Oh, wow, you're really pushing me here. Can I make it 5?
Sure.
Okay, 5. Yoda's theme, Luke and Leia. I'll just have to go the Force theme, right? Classic. I think I prefer Battle of the Heroes over Duel of the Fates.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a bit of a hot take. Maybe it's the scene that I prefer. It could
That's
be
fair
that.
enough.
That the scene has influenced my feel in the music. I think the analysis of Duel of Fates is more interesting with the orchestra fighting itself and going up and down. There's imbalance in the
Yeah.
music and the chords and the tonics are moving around.
That one's certainly an honourable mention for me.
Yeah, honorable mention. Let's go there. But Battle of the Heroes is a really iconic one. And then maybe I'll put a left field oddball in there. I'll choose a. All right, those are gonna be my 4. My 5th one will come from the sequels or the spin-offs of the TV shows. You said Mandalorian, so I'm gonna say Mandalorian. Teacher's Pet is so much fun. All right. Teacher's Pet, I'm putting it number 5, not because it's better than the other 100 tracks, because it just it means so much to me. We get that my favorite character, Luke Skywalker, Return of the Jedi, and we're getting Grogu. And we're getting this scene where it's just peaceful and they're training, and it's just this fun, light-hearted theme. So I think those are my 5 then. I'm sure after we film, I'll be like, no, those aren't my 5, actually. These are my 5. And I'm sure in a week's time, I'll go, these are my 5. In a year's time, I'll go, these are my 5. So maybe at the end of every podcast, I just relist my top 5 Star Wars themes.
Or maybe there'll have to be another episode on the music.
Maybe there will be, which I'm sure I won't complain about if I have to do more of talking about the John Williams and just Star Wars music in general. So I think those are my top 5, subject to change, massive asterisk, and in no particular order either.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's mainly it for today then.
So if you have one final thing you want the audience to remember, what would that be?
If you can, go see Star Wars played live. Whether you're in Melbourne, Sydney, anywhere in the world, if your orchestra does movie music, see it not only to support local artists and your local orchestra, but you'll gain a new appreciation for Star Wars music or just music generally. And then that might influence you to go see other orchestral events. But these Star Wars ones, especially because they'll have people dressed up beforehand as Darth Vader, Kylo Ren, the clones, the 501st will be there. And the conductor's really into it. He'll usually have like a little lightsaber stick which he conducts with. For these events, they encourage you to clap, to cheer, to boo, to do a standing ovation whenever you want. So it's not just a sit down silent, let's just watch the orchestra. You're part of this community while you're watching it. It's not like any other show. You are told to get feral, get into it, which I love because when you get a great audience, you feel like you're part of this community for a bit. People have lightsabers that are swinging about. So definitely, if you can, go to your local orchestra and see them play any music live, but especially at the movie series, and especially if you can see a Star Wars movie live, that would be incredible. So far, they've mainly done the original trilogy. I know in Perth, they've done some of the sequels.
And we recently saw
7, but Perth did Last Jedi.
Oh, yeah.
So I hope that comes here because I really like the Last Jedi score. I pray for the day that we get the prequels live.
Yeah.
I pray for the day I hear Duel of the Fate with a choir. And I hear Battle of the Heroes with the choir. So that would be great if we got episode 1, 2, and 3 all with the choir. And later this year, they're doing the MCU music, which is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. That's in October. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode. So thank you very much for joining us. Wherever you're watching or listening to us, follow us and you become a guardian of the Whills. We can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok. So follow us on all of those platforms if you can. May the podcast be with you. Bye, guys.
See you next time. Bye.